1,069 people have been diagnosed with the virus and 99 people have died. Here in Cleveland County, we have 267 confirmed cases and 17 deaths. That number never gets easier to report. But I'm hoping the information we're providing to you with events like this with our partners, Norman Regional, is helpful. So with schools closed for the year and homeschooling in full effect, parents are doing their best to care for their kids 24/7 at home during this time. So joining us today is Dr. Julia Stoltenberg, a board-certified pediatrician with Norman Pediatrics, who has some insight on questions you may be asking yourself when it comes to caring for your kids while stuck at home. Thank you for taking time to speak with us today, Dr. Stoltenberg.
Thanks so much for the opportunity. Glad to be here.
Well, as many of our viewers may know, I am mother to an almost 13-year-old. Tomorrow, I will be mother of a teenager and a 6-year-old. So I personally am very excited for today's session and the information that we're going to share with everyone today. And you said you have kids of your own?
I do. I'm personally invested here too in the trenches. I have a 4 and a 6-year-old, so I'm right there with you guys. Absolutely.
Excellent. So we'll both be able to speak from experience today. But
Yes.
Dr. Stoltenberg, I realize that cabin fever may be starting to sink in with our children. What can we do to keep them mentally and physically healthy when cooped up at home?
Sure, that's a great question. I think that structure and routine are definitely our friends in this type of a situation. Even though our day-to-day life probably looks much different than it did a few weeks ago, it's still a really good idea to create some kind of sense of normalcy for your family. So you want to create a routine where you're going to set aside, some time each day that's structured for learning, some time for, free or creative play. And I always tell my own kids and my parents of my patients that some boredom is actually okay. It allows kids to, use their imaginations. And so set aside some time for them to just have some creative play. And then really you want to stick to a good sleep routine. This is probably the most important thing. You want to dedicate, what time are we going to wake up in the morning and start our day? What time are we going to wind down and go to bed every night? While that may look slightly different than how it did when school was still in session, you don't want it to be vastly different because sleep deprivation is probably the number one thing that's going to lead to more disruptive behaviors like temper tantrums, for example. And so, there's your motivation to keep a regular sleep routine. And if you have kids 4 and under, they probably still need to have a dedicated nap time each day. If you have a 4-year-old like mine who refuses to sleep at nap, then at least allowing like a dedicated time where you're going to take at least 45 minutes to an hour to rest, turn the screens off during that time. If they don't want to sleep, then allow them to do something quiet like puzzles or look at books or something along those lines.
Now, I also teach college students at the University of Oklahoma, and I've encouraged them in establishing their routines to get dressed. Go ahead and put some clothes on.
Absolutely. It's amazing how getting out of your sweatpants will, that improves at least my mood quite a bit when I actually have some kind of semblance of a routine every day.
I agree. But you mentioned screen time. So with schoolwork being online and parents potentially running out of ideas for their kids, to do off screen, many parents are struggling with screen time for their kids. And I will confess, I am one of them. The oldest, he has a laptop that he's gotten from Norman Public Schools, which we love, but it's used for gaming quite often. So what advice on screen time specifically do you have for parents?
Yeah, thanks for asking that. This is a topic on my mind as a parent, and I know it's on, a lot of families' minds right now. The first thing, let me just review kind of what the American Academy of Pediatrics outlines for recommended screen time use. So for kids under 2 years of age, we really don't want to be exposing them to screens in general if we can help it. So we know that young kids in particular are really learning from face-to-face interaction with parents or caretakers, and they're also learning from, real interaction in a 3-dimensional real-world environment much better than they are from tablets or phones. Even if it's an educational app, kids under 2, you really want to not use much of that at all. Kids older than 2, from age 2 to 5, could do an hour or less of screen time, and kids older than 5, you want to aim for 2 hours or less per day. Now, that being said, with all of us using distance learning and trying to connect with our family and friends, over our phones and devices right now, you may not reach that perfect ideal goal, but that's kind of what you want to keep in your mind. I would strongly suggest that families consider laying out what I call a family media use plan. So you might actually want to put pen to paper and write this down and kind of delineate for your family, okay, how many hours a day am I okay with my child, teenagers spending on a device or a screen? And then you really want to separate out between, educational time and recreational use, because those are, of course, completely two separate things. Especially if you have an older child who's needing the MacBook, several hours per day for school. During the weekdays, the rest of the time, you may not do much recreational screen time use during the week, for example. But go ahead and delineate that and talk to your child about it ahead of time so they kind of know the family expectations for that. When you do have recreational use of screens, and by that I mean like streaming movies, watching cartoons, playing video games, you want to limit that. And if at all possible, like co-watching, co-playing, or at least observing and being involved in how your kids are using that and what they're doing. So you're kind of staying in touch with what they're doing. And then I do recommend having like a family check-in so that you can check in those screens and devices. It's just too tempting to let kids take their iPad to the bedroom, with them. So have them check the screen back into you when they're done using it. So those are all important things that American Academy of Pediatrics has actually on their website a template for this. So if that's something that you would find useful, families can print that off on the AAP website. If you just kind of search under media use plan, you can find that pretty easily.
Now, before we began today, I told you I had kind of sent my children upstairs to work on Khan Academy. Are there any apps that you use as a parent that are educational in nature so, you can hand them a screen but feel a little bit better about it?
Absolutely. And I've been sort of researching this a bit more since this quarantine went into effect, so I could try to find some new resources. I do use ABC Mouse with my 4 and 6-year-old. I find that helpful. I've recently discovered that TED Talks has an educational free website with lots of cool videos there. So I kind of, as a parent, like browse through and see what's age appropriate, but there's some really cool, science and art and history, all kinds of fun little videos on that. I'm really loving the Epic Reading app that the Norman Public Schools has provided. And also the Scholastic website has a lot of free resources for reading and literacy. So those are some ones I use at home.
Okay, and I know that locally, LoveWorks Leadership, my son mentioned as a 7th grader, he was going to that in person, but they have a few different speakers and whatnot on their Facebook page that they do. So, and then I do story time. I try and do story time. Well, I have done it every day. So it's at random times though. So, but if you are looking for story times to show your kids, you can go back at my videos and we've got some good ones there. Yeah.
Cool.
So to pivot away from kind of the mental health, physical health is obviously important for all of us. We want to make sure our kids are active. How do we make sure our kids are getting exercise at home when we don't have recess? There's no youth sports. We can't go on playgrounds because again, I'm all ears right now.
Yeah, just let them climb your walls and that should be adequate. No, I think absolutely. That's a great question. So we want kids to get about an hour of physical activity every day if possible. So some days, if it's a bright sunny day outside, just letting them go outside and play may be an option, or you may have to break that up into smaller increments. Maybe you're just taking a break for 5 or 10 minutes while they're doing their distance learning just to let them get up and wiggle and move around. I think that, going outdoors and, walking or jogging with your kids or letting them do things like biking or, scooters, things like that, those are all still really great options. So make sure kiddos have bicycle helmets if they're going to be using, anything on wheels like a bicycle, of course. As long as we're not getting on playground equipment and we're still maintaining that social distancing, getting outside is still a really great option. If you can't get outside like today because it's feels like a winter day outside, then you can still do some things indoors. Our first grade teacher at Cleveland Elementary, Miss Langdon, gave us a resource called Go Noodle, which is a free app you can put on a device, and it has some really cute little videos that are all like movement-based activities for kids. There's yoga on there. There's, kind of like dance videos, really simple things like turning on your kids' favorite music, letting them have a dance party, getting an old-fashioned game out like Twister. You can be as creative as you want and find ways for them to move even when you're cooped up inside.
Go Noodle, I mentioned with Mrs. Breathwaite with kindergarten at Adams. She had a digital class today, a virtual one, and we had a Go Noodle session, and I was actually dancing along with the child.
I know, it's kind of fun. So, yeah.
And you mentioned this odd weather because a week ago we had 90-degree weather, and we pulled out our slip and slide and watched the kid just run back and forth. So,
yeah, that's amazing.
So hopefully the weather will return and it'll be easier to send them outside for sure.
I think so.
But, it's clearly safe to say that COVID-19 has affected all of our daily lives and the routines that we had and the new ones we've established. But how do we as parents best handle all these disruptions to our kids' lives?
Yeah. Well, I think keeping the structured routine is, like I mentioned, is going to be really helpful. Touch base with your kids if you are noticing that they seem stressed or anxious. Talk to them about how they're feeling emotionally during this time. If they are feeling fearful or worried, you want to acknowledge that. I think as a parent, it's easy to quickly jump to saying it's going to be fine, don't worry. But when a child is experiencing any kind of stress or anxiety, just acknowledging their fear, talking through it with logic can be really helpful to them. I think that if parents are experiencing depression or anxiety, it's really important for parents to, take care of themselves, make sure parents are getting adequate rest, and make sure parents are reaching out and getting the help they need if they need help with, mental health concerns during this time, because kids will really cue off of their parents. And the last thing I want to mention is just, probably turning off the news during this time can be really helpful for kids because there's so much, we're getting a lot of the same information, especially on the national news about COVID-19. And while we want to stay up to date with what's going on in our community and nationally, not overwhelming, especially young children, with some of the news about the deaths and things like that are going on. It's probably just a good idea to limit some of that exposure.
No, I completely agree. I know we had the news on nonstop in our office, and my husband finally said I had to turn it off, and he actually noticed improvement in his own mental health once we kind of tried and created some barriers there.
Yeah.
But, when I have rough days, I obviously don't turn my children into counselors or anything, but I tell them, like, hey, I'm kind of down right now. Can I have a hug? And so I share my vulnerability with them. And then I think that helps them know that it's okay to be frustrated or anxious or scared, and that we're all here to support each other. And that's something that, we've done at home to kind of build each other up through this crazy time.
Yes, I totally agree with that approach. Yeah.
So the most important questions I think all parents have during this pandemic deal with, will my child's education suffer? My second child hasn't been as academically inclined as my first, and he had such an amazing teacher, and he was loving school and learning and this close to figuring out the reading thing. And now I'm the teacher and I can't help but panic. Is this going to affect his education long term? But then also, what will it do to their social development? Because that is so important at these younger ages, and we just can't do that right now.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, let me touch base on the social development piece of that first. I think it's human nature to want to connect and be with others, and I am so optimistic that we're all finding ways to still connect with each other. So I don't anticipate kids are going to have long-term consequences from this short-term isolation. And I'm seeing such cool things in our community, like people chalking their sidewalks and their mailboxes to stay connected, doing, neighborhood scavenger hunts where people can just drive by in their car and, check for cute little things in the window or something. So I think we're finding ways to stay connected, and, that's a great time to actually bring your technology in and, FaceTime with a grandparent or a friend or something. I also, love the idea of having an old-fashioned pen pal and introducing your kids to the snail mail if they don't know what that is yet. And my first grader, we're really working on writing right now and reading. And so, if you have a younger child that's still working on those skills, having a pen pal is a great way to connect with someone that you're not able to see right now.
And we can support the Postal Service, which is very important.
Right. That's right. Yes, absolutely. Yeah, and then as far as the education piece goes, it is disappointing that we're missing out on, 8 weeks of in-class, face-to-face, hands-on instruction. I mean, I think as a parent, I've experienced, disappointment about that as well. But I will say I've been very impressed as a parent seeing the resources that the Norman Public Schools has provided with the distance learning. And if you don't have regular access to the internet or device, I would strongly encourage those families to reach out to their teacher, to the school, because I know they're really wanting to provide families for resources to be flexible. You don't have to be a geometry teacher or a high school history teacher to impart valuable educational experiences to your child right now. And their education goes so far beyond just book learning. And so I think we kind of have, the silver lining to all of this is we kind of have this unique opportunity right now to spend some really cool time with our kids now that just the pace of life has slowed down. So I would just encourage families to, maybe share a hobby with your child, start a garden. We taught my first grader how to ride his bike last week, which we had always just, we don't have time to go to the park this weekend. And, we've had several nights of dedicated time to work on that with him. And I think those types of experiences are valuable to kids' education. And if you can spend time with a child, encouraging their curiosity and their desire to learn a new skill and conquer that's going to be something that will benefit them for their whole life, as they go forward. So even though we're missing out on some of the in-class instruction right now, I think we can still kind of seize this moment and still, have some really special time with our kids right now.
I completely agree. Two things have really helped me get through this as a parent. And one is our kindergarten teacher shared with us that, hey, next year, every teacher is going to know that these students have missed 8 weeks of in-class instruction. So don't stress about that.
Yes.
And then the second is, while we're struggling with, mortgage payments and anxiety and physical health, especially the little one, all he sees is wow, my parents are here all the time. We play board games every night. He's living his best life right now.
That's right. And we're all in this together. So the teachers are going to support and help these kids when we get back into the classroom next year.
Exactly. Yeah. Well, Dr. Stoltenberg, thank you so much for joining us today. This has been very helpful and educational for me, and I really appreciate your time. And for all of you watching, I hope you enjoyed it as well. Please share this video so people in your circle, especially parents, can get this very helpful information. And if you have any fun ideas that you're doing at home, leave them in the comments for other people to try. I think Dr. Stoltenberg and I gave you some personal tips that we're doing ourselves here at home. But I love all of the great ideas that I'm seeing out in the Norman community, and I'd love to read yours as well. So thank you so much for joining us today, and we'll see you on Wednesday, 2 o'clock. Take care.